Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Eden Mabon of lightcycleastrology.com. Welcome back to the channel, friends. Happy Monday, and I hope you had a great weekend. Well, today we are getting into the big one. This is Pluto in Aquarius that we're talking about, as Pluto is moving into the sign of Aquarius this Thursday, March 23rd, around 8:24 a.m. Eastern time. So this is the big enchilada that we're talking about. Pluto moves into another sign and then stays within the sign of Aquarius for, a couple of decades nearly. So this is a really, really big topic to talk about, as Pluto in a new sign is going to sort of give us some background energy that we're dealing with over the course of many, many years. And I just want to forewarn you that today's content is going to be a little bit heavy because we're talking about Pluto here. And Pluto really doesn't have like a light and rosy side to him, When it comes to Pluto, people naturally become afraid, and there are things that we fear about the unknown and darkness, and that connection that Pluto has with things that are transformative and in usually a kind of intense way. So naturally, people fear Pluto transits, and I think that is rightly so. But at the same time that we are talking about Pluto, and I think it's really important for astrologers to talk about Pluto in the context of Aquarius, it gives us some indication of maybe where society writ large is heading. But at the same time that we talk about something that is heavy and not, rosy and light, we also don't want to add to a matrix of fear. But it's like, how do you balance just being real? And, if there's any usefulness of astrologers or people that subscribe to astrological philosophy, it's that we can see themes that are eternal, that have always been with mankind, coming and going as they do. And so, we could add to a sense of understanding out there, or just within ourselves, which is, of course, always useful. So on the one hand, you don't want to add to a fear of matrix, but on the other hand, you can't really paint Pluto as a rosy and light sort of thing. So just forewarning you or forearming you that, this is a little bit heavier of a topic to talk about. Now, how do you deal with Pluto? The general consensus among good astrologers is that all you can really do is sort of try to understand what is happening and to move into a place of acceptance, even if that takes a while, and it usually does. That's about all you can do. Pluto is a planet that connects to themes that are overpowering, that we have no control over, that are essentially these big forces of nature that sort of throw us around or fling us around like rag dolls. And there isn't a lot we can do if you try to suppress the energies of Pluto, if you try to circumvent them. Usually what happens is that ends up being even worse, because it's better to take Plutonian kinds of energies and try to slowly release them and work with them, versus trying to circumvent or suppress out of fear of something that is inevitable, that we just have no control over. So all that being said, we are dealing with a god of transformation, a god of death and rebirth, a god of power and power struggles, and just things that are below the surface, unknown, invisible, hidden, secretive. Those are pretty powerful topics to talk about. But that's what we're going to get into today. So now, before we jump in, as always, please like and share the video. That really pushes the algorithm forward, and I really do appreciate that. Also, leave comments in the comment section. Let me know how you're reflecting on Pluto in Aquarius. Now, on Wednesday, we're going to get into some rising sign horoscopes for all 12 rising signs that is going to place Pluto into a new house in your horoscope. And so we'll be able to take a look at what Pluto may be suggesting for you based on those house topics. Today, we're just going to talk about the general themes in more of a mundane or worldly sense, as it were, and just get familiar with Pluto in Aquarius. But anyway, if you're ever interested in a astrology reading by me, you can go to my website, lightcycleastrology.com, and send me a message, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. And that is one way that I keep the lights on for this YouTube channel. Anyway, thanks so much for that. Okay, let's go ahead and pull up the real-time clock and take a look at Pluto's entrance into the sign of Aquarius, which takes place March 23rd, this Thursday, around 8:24 a.m. Eastern time in the morning. So this is going to be just a sneak preview of Pluto in the sign of Aquarius. We get this for about 3 months during 2023, and that's because Pluto goes forward until about May. And then if we go forward on the clock here, you'll see that eventually here comes the retrograde of Pluto for the year of 2023 by May 2nd. And then by around June 11th, Pluto moves back into the sign of Capricorn. So that's all we get for Pluto in the sign of Aquarius, just a 3-month stretch there this year. But then by January 21st of 2024, so we go forward by a couple of months here, Pluto goes through the retrograde in Capricorn. And then by the beginning of next year, here comes Pluto once again for the second time entering the sign of Aquarius, for the second time in the last 240 odd years or so, January 21st, 2024. Now we get a little bit longer of a period in this year. Pluto makes its way a little bit further into the sign, and basically at one point again goes into retrograde and then heads back towards Capricorn and walks back into Capricorn by September the 2nd. So we go forward by months here, and we're going to see the same things. Pluto going into Capricorn by September the 2nd. So that's the second time that Pluto dips back into Capricorn out of Aquarius, 2024. And then essentially it doesn't stay long this time now in the sign of Capricorn. It only spends a couple of months because by November 20th, we get Pluto stationing to turn direct, and then is going to head back into the sign of Aquarius one final time here by November the 20th. And once Pluto is in Aquarius this time around, this is going to be where we have Pluto for the next 18 years and 9 months. So we go forward by years now, many, many, many years. Pluto goes through Aquarius, and essentially it's almost like 2 decades of this experience here. So a very big transit, but by March the 9th, 2043 is going to be the first time that we see Pluto leaving the sign of Aquarius. And it's going to do the same thing as when it entered Aquarius. It's going to dip in and dip out because of those retrogrades. But by, let's see, go forward by months here, by March 9th. Yeah, we'll just go forward by one more month here. By March 9th, there it is. Pluto enters Pisces for the first time. And it's going to do the same thing. It's going to go back into Aquarius. But all in all, we have about an 18, almost a 19-year stretch of Pluto in the sign of Aquarius. So that is a very large and profound experience because it takes so long to get through anyone's sign. Before we move on to the meaning of Pluto in the sign of Aquarius, is the interesting difference in timing that Pluto spends in the sign of Aquarius as compared to how long it's spent in the sign of Capricorn. If you add up all of the months that Pluto was in Capricorn for, it's about 16 years. And then if you do the same thing for this period of Pluto going in and out of Aquarius, if you add up all those years and months of Pluto in Aquarius, it's about 21 years and some odd months. So it's quite a difference. It's almost like a 6-year prolonged difference that Pluto will spend in the sign of Aquarius compared to how long it spent in Capricorn. So that's one interesting thing. And we do know that about Pluto is it has that erratic orbit around the sun where sometimes it goes really, really fast and then other times it's slower. So very interesting. We have a much longer time to experience Pluto in this Saturn-ruled sign than we did in the last Saturn-ruled sign. Another point of interest, I think, is also that when we get to around July 2025, one of the most important transits, I think, that happens is that we see, here comes, look at Uranus down here in the last degrees of Taurus as we march towards July of this year. And then eventually we get Uranus ingressing into the sign of Gemini, and Pluto and Uranus immediately begin forming a trine with one another. And this trine between these two planets moves in and out of orb over the next couple of years until eventually Uranus gets far enough into Gemini that that trine doesn't form anymore. So that is definitely one of the most interesting and important transits that is going to be happening with Pluto as he runs through the sign of Aquarius. Another thing that you could think about is, during this time, Jupiter will almost make 2 times around the zodiac. Jupiter takes around 12 years to go through the zodiac. So we're going to have a Jupiter conjunction. We're going to have several Mars conjunctions to Pluto, maybe in the ballpark of, say, 10. We're going to have maybe like 15 to 16 Venus conjunctions. We won't have a Saturn conjunction to Pluto, although, of course, we'll have some squares and oppositions during that period. But this is such a long period of time that you see a lot of planets obviously making aspects to Pluto. But I think because Uranus is such a slow-moving planet and Pluto is such a slow-moving planet, those trines between the two are going to be really, really important and profound. Obviously, we'll take a look at that as time marches on and we get closer to these transits, but that's probably some of the biggest fireworks that we get with Pluto in the sign of Aquarius is during those periods right in the beginning where, in the first couple of years where we see this trine to Uranus, a god of revolution and invention. Okay, so now let's get into some of the archetypal meaning that we could speculate upon with Pluto moving into this new sign of Aquarius. The general consensus today is that among the astrological community, 93 years after Pluto has been discovered now, is that Pluto represents, among other things, themes or periods of intense, slow, and nearly total personal transformation, among other things. So there's obviously a lot more that Pluto represents, but the biggest general consensus is that as we've had time to try to understand and grapple with what this newly discovered planet could be representing or being connected to, archetypally speaking, it seems to bear witness that Pluto has this connection to very intense, very slow, important transformational moments or periods of time. However, due to Pluto having the slowest orbital speed of any known planet in our solar system, Pluto connects us to periods of time that roughly correspond to a generation and how the world transforms over the course of a generation. So that's a really important thing. Whenever we talk about Pluto, the period of time that we're looking at Pluto in any given sign is so long that you have to be really careful about what you say. If you say, okay, this is going to happen or this theme is going to come up. Well, in the space of like 20 years, of course, many, many things could come up and could happen. So it's a little bit tricky to not say things that are just going to sound trite. But we definitely can, get a sense of what this is going to be like. But that's one thing to take note is that Pluto connects us with generations or periods of time that roughly correspond to a generation. So in modern astrology, of course, Pluto is called a transpersonal planet, and that's because of this generational connection that Pluto has simply as a planet that takes around, nearly 2 decades to run through any sign. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And I think from that, you could derive some questions like, how do we slowly transform over the course of the next 20 years based on how society transforms around us? This is a long enough time frame where you'll definitely see some pretty major changes within society. So how does that impact us individually, I think is one question that deals with Pluto being interpreted through the sign of Aquarius. And another question I think that is sort of the flip side of that question is, how do we as individuals, of course, transform society based on our own long, slow, deep, and personal transformation, right? It's a feed loop, right, that connects both sides of what is transforming. Today, we're going to get into the transit on a world scale sort of level, and on Wednesday, we'll be doing some rising sign horoscopes to see what house Pluto is moving into to get a sense of what topics may be coming up for you personally. So let's now take a look at some of the themes that could mark this period of Pluto running through the sign of Aquarius by combining the essential dignities from traditional astrology for the sign, along with the modern symbolism associated with the planet Pluto. So starting with Aquarius in terms of the sign's essential dignities. So we're just going to take a look at, in traditional astrology, what did they say about this sign in terms of its characteristics based on its essential dignities? Well, Aquarius is traditionally a daytime or masculine sign. That's a really important thing that we're going to get into. But it was also said to be ruled by the planet Saturn from the standpoint of traditional astrology again. And it was also said to be a fixed or solid sign, meaning it was a sign that comes in the middle of the season that it belongs to. So it's not Capricorn turning winter into winter, and it's not Pisces getting ready to transform winter into spring. So the characteristic of all solid or fixed signs, and especially Aquarius, it has that very fixed quality to it. And that gives it that stubbornness as well. But it was also connected to the mental, communicative, or social qualities of the air element. And this is also really, really important. So right off the bat, what could we say or interpret from these essential dignities when we combine Pluto in here? Well, we have, for instance, the liberation of trapped ideas. Elements of society not given a voice could erupt. And I think most people are familiar with Pluto as having that kind of volatile eruption or explosive energy that when things are pushed below the surface and there's a certain time at which those things need to be released. So could people within society that feel like they don't have a voice, could people that aren't allowed to think what they want to think, write what they want to write, those things connected with air, could people that just feel like they're marginalized within social contexts, could Pluto in Aquarius be speaking to this explosive energy that will represent people that are sort of disenfranchised or don't have a voice? And at some point, do ideas just explode into the mainstream narrative that haven't been there before? I think that is definitely something to watch for. Aquarius also exalts or depresses no planet, but it does stand in opposition to the sun's domicile of Leo. And this is really, really important, and thus describes Aquarius as a sign that contradicts, resists, rebels, and questions things that are solar in nature around it. This is a very, very important point, because although we can't describe Aquarius through a planet that it exalts or through a planet that it may depress, like we could when Pluto was in Capricorn, with Mars being the exalted planet and Jupiter being the depressed planet. Although we don't have those essential dignities to work with here, one of the really important things is simply that Aquarius stands as a sign in opposition to Leo, the temple where the sun was said to have its domicile. So right off the bat, Aquarius is a sign that has a natural tension with solar kinds of things. So whatever authority is around it, it tends to contradict, resist, rebel, or at the very least, call those things into question. It sort of says, well, I know you have the authority, but should I really respect that authority? Is that authority is it something that is really legitimate? I think that is a big streak of characteristic that Aquarius tends to bring to the community and the collective, for sure. So, for example, the phrase "nothing new under the sun," I think that this really gets at the spirit of Pluto in Aquarius, because what this phrase is getting at, this old adage, there's some kind of wisdom that tries to deal with the arrogance of people that may not understand that our lifetimes are so short that we can be arrogant sometimes to think we know everything that has happened or will happen. So there's a sense in which this phrase is really getting at the wider viewpoint that perhaps time is eternal and cyclical, and that things have risen and been and then fallen away again, and we simply don't know about it because we weren't there. But there's this arrogance within mankind that sort of says, well, we know what has been and what hasn't been. But I think you could contradict that wisdom, in other words, through Pluto by saying, well, Pluto itself was at one point discovered, and that differentiates the traditional world from the modern world itself. So I think that when we talk about things that contradict, resist, rebel, or call into question solar kinds of things, I think that we're saying that when Pluto travels through the sign of Aquarius, we very, very well may see new things under the sun. We could even discover a new planet. There could be more adventures that go deeper into space for us. We could maybe make it to Mars. Definitely new technology. So what things that we probably can't even foresee or imagine right now will be with us by the time Pluto has traveled mostly through the sign, maybe 20 years from now? What kinds of things are with us that we could argue and say, well, for sure, we haven't had this before, insofar as like we could say today, like for sure, we haven't probably had a population that all had smartphones, for sure, mankind from the ancient sense did not travel to outer space as astronauts. These are things that I think that is pretty, we're standing on solid ground to say that there are some things that are new under the sun. And so I think Pluto in the sign of Aquarius really represents those kinds of things. But they're sort of hard to talk about because I don't think we can even imagine them quite yet. But that is definitely a theme that I think we see coming about over the next 20 years for sure. Pluto in a daytime sign. Pluto is the fear of the unknown, fitting more naturally in with the dark nighttime because the dark is where we are used to not being able to see things. So this is something that I just think is so fascinating about, almost like a meditation where you can meditate on what it's like that Pluto has this connection to things that are hidden or secretive or invisible. And you get the sense that Pluto is kind of like the dark night. And so darkness belongs with darkness here. We've recently been through a 16-year period where Pluto was traveling through a nighttime sign. So what I'm getting at here is perhaps there were many ways that Capricorn as a cardinal sign was gestating Pluto, Saturn kinds of things, but because it was gestating within or in the nighttime, it was very hard to see. We really don't see it quite yet. So my contention here is that perhaps as Pluto moves into a daytime sign, that it's like the nightmare of the darkness or the fear of the unknown. That unknown dark realm sort of intrudes upon waking life. That's sort of my contention with this theme here. So from that, you could see all, so many different kinds of things that could represent. But think about those dark, unknown qualities that are now going to emerge within regular waking life. I think that is a fascinating thing to wonder about here. Saturn eats his children. That's also something that was an ancient delineation for the planet Saturn, is that he, from the mythological story of him, he feared his children having more power than he would eventually. So his solution to this was to eat them. So I kind of wonder, as Pluto travels through these Saturn-ruled signs over the previous 16 years and on into the next 20 years, is this a period that we're going into, a time where children don't have the best future ahead of them? So it's like the power struggles of today, or the wrestling over the earth that Saturn represents, that happens today. So for instance, things like Social Security or taxes or raising the debt ceiling to do whatever it is we're doing, are all of these things, the things that we're doing to the economy, just a whole, basket of things that are happening today. Are some of those things limiting the future of children? I sort of wonder if there is some kind of theme that gets at Saturn eating the children, meaning that children face a future that is sort of taken away from them. We're not getting symbolism that says, hey, we're moving into a bright future here. Not yet. Now, as Pluto moves into the sign of Pisces in 20 years, we may very well see a kind of cycling back towards a future where we do get some kind of hope and brightness that seems to be represented by the symbolism. But as for the next 20 years, this is a dark sign in a winter season. And we're talking about Pluto here again. So it makes me wonder about some of these darker themes that could be coming through as they pertain to children. Okay, who is powerful and who is dispossessed? Shoots within the collective that have their own power, like people that are social media influencers, and the extinction of the middle class. So this dichotomy again that we often find so much in the sign of Aquarius, and this connection that Pluto has to people who vie or try to hold on to power. This makes me think that Aquarius as a collective sign, we've already seen a lot of transition in this field where it used to be, I remember a time where if you turned on the TV, there was like the, Ed Koppel or somebody like that. There were very specific people within society that had notoriety. They were, famous or rich, and they were at the top. And then there was sort of the middle class, and then there was, the disenfranchised below. But there were very clear like segments of society, and people that had notoriety were not usually among like the middle class or any other class other than like the upper classes. But with the technology that we've already seen in the last 16 years, we have definitely seen how it's like shoots of people that just pop up here and there. And it's all based on our technology and our access to the technology, where the common person can grab a camera like myself, and now, more people know me than probably I would have had the opportunity to have if, we were before some of this technology a couple of decades ago. So I think that you see the stabilization of that. Again, Aquarius as a fixed sign. I think that you see a time where that sort of thing becomes even more normal, or it's just more people have the ability to sort of shoot up and get some kind of notoriety within different classes. But I also think that by way of like perhaps economic situations or governmental situations, the way that governments may be reorganizing, I think that you could also get a sense that the middle class goes through an extinction here. And so there's this power dynamic that shifts. And I think that that is also a big theme for Pluto in the sign of Aquarius, a sign that is dealing with social classes. Okay, Pluto, as a god of the underworld, makes himself known inside the city and outside of the city gates. Things that are popular become more Pluto-like, and also things that are outside of the narrative or symbolically outside of the city gates, those that dwell beyond the city, also sort of take on more of a Plutonian or underworld kind of characteristic. And actually, I want to share with you, I'm going to pull up the real-time clock again here. I want to share with you how I'm getting at some of these things, because this is really important. So let me go ahead and pull up my annotation here and draw some circles and some lines. So here we have Aquarius, and opposite to Aquarius, we have Leo. Okay, so that oppositional viewpoint that Aquarius has to solar kinds of things is one way in which you could see this quality that Aquarius has connecting to things that are popular and things that are unpopular or sort of taboo. The sign really has this perspective from a number of different places. So for one is this opposition to the sun's temple of Leo, but it has a couple of more of those actually. The other way in which you see Aquarius having this interesting viewpoint or vantage point is that the beginning of Capricorn is the winter solstice, and the beginning of Aries is the spring equinox. So look at Aquarius. Aquarius is right in the middle between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. Aquarius sits right at the middle. So not only does Aquarius have this vantage point where he stands in opposition to solar kinds of things, but the sun is at its lowest place in the sky when it reaches the winter solstice. But it's at this moment that the sun begins to rise again. By the time the sun gets to Aries, we say that Aries is the temple where the sun becomes exalted. And that's because it is at this time of the year, this spring equinox time right here, the end of Pisces and the beginning of Aries, that the light half of the year begins. The 6 months of light that is basically, there is more daylight in a 24-hour period than there is nighttime. So from Aries all the way until the end of Virgo, we have a period that is more has more daylight than it does nighttime. And then once the sun passes by the fall equinox, likewise, we go into 6 months of having more darkness or nighttime than we do in a 24-hour period. So we split the wheel up into these two halves, and we say that Aries to Virgo is the light half of the year, and Libra to the end of Pisces is the dark half of the year. So there are very interesting perspectives that Aquarius has because it sits at the border or on the threshold or in the middle between very two important solar times of year, where on the one hand, it's within the dark half of the year. So it understands what is happening right now. And what is happening right now is sort of dark. It's cold. It's distant. It's isolated. It's entrenched within the old or current form of the status quo, the current narrative. That is why Saturn, as a ruler of this sign, is thought of as a traditional kind of planet, because it traditionally upholds that current status quo of darkness or established order. But likewise, at the same time, a very profound thing about Aquarius is that he also can see the other direction towards the coming of the light half of the year. And that represents that there is some kind of inevitability that Saturn has, or Aquarius has the wisdom to understand there is some new order that is on the horizon that is inevitable, and that is represented by the coming light half of the year. So Aquarius deals with this juxtaposition. It knows what is established. It knows what is the status quo. It is traditional in that sense, but it also sees the inevitability of something coming that is progressive and new and on the horizon. It's a new kind of light. It's a new spring, a new year. So that is the perspective that Aquarius and Saturn as the ruler of Aquarius also holds. So we not only do we have the opposition from Aquarius to solar kinds of things, where Saturn is questioning solar kinds of things, but we also have this a position between the winter solstice and the spring equinox that gives it this diametric viewpoint. There's one other way in which we have the same kind of symbolism. Saturn as a planet within the solar system also is the last visible planet, as you know, I'm sure everybody knows. But if you think about this for a second, if Saturn looks over his shoulder one way, he looks back towards the party of planets that are commingling together around the sun. And that gives him the perspective of what is popular. What is everybody doing on one side of me? But on the other side of him, if he looks over the shoulder the other way, there's only the lonely planets of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto that are out there. And then it's just the dark beyond, the dark, starry, eternal beyond. So in a sense, Saturn has that dual perspective again, where he's like, okay, I see what is popular on one side of me, but I also see what is outside of the popularity, what is maybe beyond what the popular group can even comprehend. They just simply don't have that perspective. But Saturn does have that perspective. So that is where I'm coming up with some of these themes here, where we are saying things like Pluto, the god of the underworld, makes himself known inside the city and outside of the city. That's because Pluto moving into this sign is going to naturally adhere himself or emerge within popular culture while simultaneously symbolically representing those people that are outside of the gates, that are beyond. And so first of all, let's look at how could Pluto become like popular within the gates of the city. Well, we already have seen a satanic performance at the Grammys, even though Pluto hasn't been in the sign of Aquarius when this happened. It is still so close to the sign's emergence that you really do sort of get a sense of that. Do we see things like Satanism or satanic performances, just things that are just wild like that, coming from that darker realm of the underworld, sort of emerging into popular culture? Well, we already have seen a little taste of that with this satanic performance at the Grammys. That's something that I couldn't even imagine, 2 or 3 decades ago myself personally. It just blows my mind. Okay, acceptable conspiracies like aliens become normalized. So, do we live 20 years from now in a society that basically the popular culture says, oh, yeah, there's totally aliens out there? Like, that's not even, like, you're crazy to think that that isn't a thing that is totally happening. That's something like that. Research into ghosts and the afterlife, Pluto as a representative of those types of things. Could those things become popular? Like in the movies Flatliners. You guys ever remember Flatliners? Flatliners was that, if you haven't seen it, it's a movie where I'm forgetting his name right now, but Keith Sutherland. Yeah, Keith Sutherland and a group of pre-medical students or something, they decide that they want to explore beyond death. And so they hook themselves up to all sorts of, things, and then they purposefully cause them to go into flatline so that they can experience what's beyond, experience what happens when you're dead. And then they try to resuscitate them. And then as soon as they come back, then they share the experiences that they all have. And of course, it devolves into some pretty scary things that happen. But could we see the underworld emerging within popular culture? Maybe it could just simply be within entertainment, like more movies like Flatliners. But could it actually be something like people exploring the afterlife or ghosts? Could that become popular? Cults and secret societies considered as normal. Yeah, there was a time at the beginning of the founding of America where secret societies were very normal within society itself. Like, it was not even a weird thing that a lot of people belonged to all of these different societies, and they all had their esoteric teachings, and they were supposedly secret in terms of you weren't supposed to share those things. I wonder if Pluto in Aquarius is a time where we see like the resurgence of cults or secret societies that just somehow seem normal as part of everyday society. Of course, things like magic become mainstream in terms of being practiced, and so I think you get the idea here. But also, how do we see Plutonian kinds of themes or that underworld essence creeping in or representing those that are outside the gates? Organized crime, that could be one of them. Also, desperation pushing quote unquote normal people into criminality. So I kind of wonder, again, going back to this thing where Aquarius deals with those that are disenfranchised or outside of the gates. Could we see more people that just are living outside of those gates? Could people that would have been inside the gates, metaphorically, could we see more of those inside the gate people just simply being outside the gate for whatever reason, society leaving them behind, them leaving society behind? And are they in a position? Do circumstances require them to do things that they wouldn't normally do? Maybe even criminal kinds of things. I wonder about that. The rising number of dispossessed people. Thought criminals are those that refuse to go along with the narrative. So, I think you get the idea here, but these are all things that I think could become prominent with Pluto in sign of Aquarius. Okay, the archetype of Saturn deals with those that fit into the current narrative and those that progressively oppose it. Right. The adoption of ideologies that tear apart society and then reform society. This is another big theme that I think we're going to see for sure. Of course, we've already seen a lot of this over the last 16 years as Pluto has been making his way through Capricorn. But now, again, we're going into a daytime sign. So could we see the rise of those ideological perspectives held by certain members or people within society that are instrumental in sort of tearing apart the society, that Plutonian quality of sort of, tearing something apart and then rebuilding it, that transformative quality that we associate with Pluto, running through a collective or social kind of sign like Aquarius, and that air elemental quality. You combine all of those things and you sort of wonder, it's hard to even almost imagine that ideological differences within society could even become more ramped up than they already are. But I sort of wonder if that's exactly what is about to happen. Okay, society and the mind. So we're talking about, how do we change society? How does society change us through things like AI, VR, the metaverse, psychotropic antigens, shamanism, designer stimulant drugs, human enhancement, etc. So I'll give you an example of this. The other day, I was asking Alexa in my living room a question, and after she answered, I was like, I felt the need to be polite and say, "Hey, thank you." That's humanity, right? Humanity has this notion of politeness and being kind to one another. But then I sort of was taken aback by myself. I was like, why do I feel the need? I sort of questioned it. Why do I feel the need to be polite to something that isn't human, isn't truly going to appreciate that, or can't truly appreciate that? And I thought, is that a waste of time? And then I realized, well, not really, because I'm upholding my values as a human. So whether AI appreciates me being polite or not, I think we're going to see things like that emerge within the next 20 years. Etiquette and politeness. How do we treat AI? How does AI treat us? How does AI validate us? There was another thing that blew my mind the other day. A friend of mine told me that one of his youngest children was really, really, really excited because Alexa had finally recognized his voice. And I thought to myself, wow, this has got to be one of the first generations of humans ever to walk the earth that was waiting for artificial intelligence to validate them as young as that. So things in that realm, I think we're going to see more of that. But of course, we have virtual reality, the metaverse. Those things are going to be huge, of course, as time goes on in the next 20 years. But we also have things like human enhancement, that movie Elysium, where everybody has those chips that are like in their neck, things like that. If you watch Elysium, you'll get a sense of like, maybe there's like human enhancement through technology that is on the horizon that's coming. Okay, farming protests and wars of attrition. Saturn in ancient astrology has always been connected to farming, to laborers of the earth, and also to those that control the laborers, the people in charge of the laborers, the slave masters. So in the ancient world, of course, almost everybody was farming, and there were very, very few people at the top of the social hierarchy that were in charge of those farmers. And generally, the farmers didn't own the land. It was the landowners. So Saturn connects to those landowners, those oppressive, authoritarian, dictator kinds of people that control the land, own the laborers that are farming the land. So definitely Pluto running through Aquarius, I get the sense that we are talking about the increase of strife and conflict and power struggle within the farming community, farmers themselves protesting, wars of attrition fought by governments or governmental entities that want to restrict farming. And the reason why I think that this may be coming online now is because, again, we're talking about the transition from Pluto traveling through a nighttime Saturn ruled sign into a daytime Saturn ruled sign. And when does farming happen? Well, generally it happens during the day. So we may have already seen some of these things begin as Pluto was traveling through Capricorn, but most farming isn't done at night. So I'm just extracting some symbolic language here and some symbolic thought and or some metaphorical ways of saying that I wonder if in the future, over the next 20 years, we really do see farming being a big issue and power struggles within the farming community. Invisible future, invisible past. This one is connecting a little bit to the theme of Saturn eats his children. Because I wonder, okay, well, let's actually take invisible past to start with, because I wonder if the ways in which society teaches children, I wonder if that happens in such a way that children don't have, for whatever reason or cause, just don't have a connection to the past. Because again, Saturn has that viewpoint of being able to see the past, seeing the winter, but also looking toward the future. So how do we see Pluto as a god that represents things that are invisible, somehow making the past invisible? And I think that it's coming through the hallways of education, perhaps with children. Could children be not taught history in the same way? Could, just for whatever reason, history become just not very popular, and it's sort of a subject that, people just kind of like, you're a nerd if you like history or something. It's already like that, but do we have an emergence of new generations that come about that simply just don't have that connection to the past? They're not educated in it, or they don't have that connection. It isn't visible somehow. And likewise, this is a little bit darker, but do we have people that control the world that, for perhaps nefarious reasons, don't want humankind to see what is coming in the future? This is a little bit like George Orwell's 1984, where things are shoved down the memory hole and the future is always so uncertain that you're just kind of stuck in the now. Like, there's no future, there's no past. How do we see Pluto as a planet that represents things that are invisible, moving or traveling through a sign that deals with the past and the future? So I wonder if the past and the future becomes invisible. Now, also, though, to be fair, Pluto does reveal things that are invisible. For instance, when Pluto was discovered, we all of a sudden, something that was invisible became revealed. So likewise, you could see as a flip side of this, things that are secretive in the past or things that are secretive coming in the future are also revealed. Okay, transfiguration defined as a complete change of form or appearance into a more beautiful or spiritual state. I love this word transfiguration because we're talking about Pluto as a god of transformation, but we're specifically talking about a kind of transformation that the new form that emerges is somehow more beautiful or more spiritual. As Aquarius deals with social narratives, social context, the collective writ large, I wonder how society transforms, but how does it attempt to transform in such a way that is more beautiful or spiritual? So you have things like the social warrior. You have ideologies that come in that say, society should move towards this ideal. And you very quickly could see a dark element creeping into this that connects to things like utopia or dystopia. But you get this march towards progress, and everybody has their version of utopia. And especially in Aquarius, you see two basic camps, in my opinion. One basic camp of people finds the ideal society to be sometime in the past. There was a golden age that what once was. And if we could just go forward by somehow bringing back some of those elements, that would be the ideal world or the ideal society to live in. So that's one camp. The other camp, of course, finds the opposite way to look, and they look ahead towards the future. And the ideology says we are outdated, our ideas, the things that we do are antiquated, outdated. They're outmoded. We need to just leave some of these darker traits behind. We need to just shed some of the things that are bad or unevolved or antiquated or whatever it is. But we need to get rid of them, because if we can move into the future without these things, then we'll emerge into the future in this utopia kind of ideal world. So that is another theme that I think is very, very big with Pluto and Aquarius, is the kind of transfiguration. Well, okay, let me say a kind of transformation that takes on a transfigurative mode of expressing itself, because you blend it with that perspective that Aquarius has, where it's either taking the perspective of trying to hold on to the past, trying to keep a hold of traditions, that conservative kind of viewpoint, or it's being progressive and saying, the future is inevitable. We're marching towards it. Like, we don't necessarily need all of these older things. We just got to get rid of them so we can emerge in some kind of more perfect ideal world. So that's a theme that I think is definitely going to be one that we see very prominently. We've already been seeing that, but what I'm saying here is, as Pluto begins to travel more and more into the sign of Aquarius, I think that those themes become even more ramped up than we see them now. So that is what I have for today. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. Please let me know in the comments what you've thought about all of these themes, any reflections that you have. I'd love to hear from you. And what we're going to do is, on Wednesday, we are going to do horoscopes for all 12 rising signs. We're going to take the micro perspective on Wednesday by bringing down Pluto into a new house based on your rising sign. We're going to zoom in and say what things could potentially be about to go through a period of transformation, the kinds of topics based on the house topics in your life personally that are going to maybe see a 20-year period or like a generation where those topics move through transformation, move through transfiguration in the sign of Aquarius. So that's going to be really exciting. So I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you have a good rest of your week, and I'll be back again on Wednesday. Thanks so much, everybody. Until then, take care. Bye.